Since Donald Trump was re-elected, his promise to quickly end the Russia-Ukraine war seems increasingly challenging. Western mainstream media, such as the Financial Times, recently cited European officials stating that Trump's team has informed them that the U.S. president-elect plans to continue military aid to Kyiv after taking office. He is said to be attempting to ease fears of an immediate withdrawal of U.S. support, while demanding NATO member states increase their defense spending to 5% of GDP. However, this information contradicts Trump's earlier stance, as the new president once mocked Zelensky as the greatest businessman in the world, given how easily Ukraine secured tens of billions of dollars from U.S. taxpayers. Thus, it is hard to imagine that sending more weapons to Ukraine or strengthening NATO would successfully achieve peace. The Russian military continues its slow but steady advances, leading Putin to possibly conclude that his country should push for a more comprehensive military victory and challenge any Western peace proposals shortly. However, the new Donald Trump administration has a chance to escape the current situation and work with Russia to end the war. Observers predict that several issues are of mutual interest to President-elect Trump and President Putin, including China and prioritizing Russia's interests in the Arctic, a topic that would undoubtedly catch Putin's attention. Such an approach could also appeal to Trump, who often views situations through the lens of a businessman seeking significant deals. Western media have paid little attention to President Putin's attendance at the launch of the new Chukotka nuclear icebreaker on November 6, but it reveals Putin's intentions in the Arctic. Independent Russian media outlet the Moscow Times wrote that Russia aims to expand its presence in the Arctic and replace markets lost due to Western sanctions. Chukotka is reportedly the world's largest and most efficient nuclear icebreaker, measuring 173 meters in length and weighing 33,500 tons. It is powered by 2 nuclear reactors generating 350 megawatts of electricity, enabling it to break through ice nearly 3 meters thick. Such vessels are not cheap, costing around $500 million. President Putin stated, "The construction of these modern, powerful ships is yet another testament to Russia's industrial, scientific, human, and technological potential." Chukotka is the 4th nuclear icebreaker in the series, following Arktika, Sibir, and Ural. These icebreakers are destined for the Northern Sea route, which spans approximately 5,000 kilometers between the Barents Sea and the Chukchi Sea, connecting Western Europe with the Asia-Pacific. This year, new records were set along this route, including the transit of the largest container ship ever through the Arctic in September, and a record volume of oil transported. Despite political and economic challenges, the Arctic remains a top priority for Russian leadership, as the region accounts for about 10% of Russia's GDP and 20% of its export revenue. Russian energy analysts aim to increase the volume of exported resources via this maritime route 6 to 7-fold, reaching to 100 million tons within the next 5 years. Allprice says, Russia possesses enormous resources in the Arctic to drive export expansion. However, Russia's Arctic ambitions go beyond oil and gas reserves. Russian leaders understand that the country's economic growth is often hindered by most of its major rivers, such as the Ob, Yenisei, and Lena, flowing northward into the Arctic. Thus, the Northern Sea route is key to unlocking significant development for Russia's vast, resource-rich interior regions and the remote Siberian territories. President Putin also understands that tanks and missiles won't make Russia more substantial and more prosperous in the future. Still, a grand economic project in the Arctic could sustainably achieve that. However, Russia also recognizes that the Arctic route will never realize its full potential without Western support. This is why the Arctic project could have the most significant impact on ending the war in Ukraine. The transport route through the Arctic, especially for oil, remains one of the few geoeconomic priorities that the Kremlin considers on par with Ukraine's geopolitical priority. Western NATO countries such as Canada, Finland, Norway, and Sweden, as well as Asian nations like South Korea and Japan, all stand to benefit from this northernmost route. The US itself has significant interests here as well. However, all these countries are currently distancing themselves from Russia. A cooperative exploitation agreement between Russia and these significant powers would be necessary to enable all parties to exploit and benefit from the Arctic route without conflict fully. As such, Trump would need to lift the sanctions imposed by Biden on Russia's Arctic exploitation activities. President-elect Trump has already taken bold steps in foreign policy. For example, the Spanish media outlet El País reported on December 22 that Trump is increasing pressure on President Zelensky to consider a ceasefire and relinquish all lost territories. The report also mentioned that Trump aims to end the war at the negotiation table as quickly as possible. Russia hasn't lost everything in Syria. For over 10 days, Western mainstream media has extensively commented on Russia's defeat in Syria and its potential loss of an essential ally in West Asia. However, developments in Syria may not fully reflect reality. During his annual Q&A session in Moscow on December 19, President Putin revealed several recent developments in Syria. These were his first public comments on the subject amidst current instability. Putin disclosed that he would soon meet with Assad, signaling an unusual level of transparency in international diplomacy, especially under such uncertain circumstances. For comparison, it is worth noting that the public still does not know what happened to former Afghan President Ashraf Ghani after the Taliban captured Kabul, nor whether President Biden received the USS Fallen Ally. Additionally, the period during which former President Assad was granted asylum in Russia and the peaceful transfer of power in Damascus suggest that the Kremlin was not surprised by the Syrian government's collapse. Statements by Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan align with these developments. According to him, under Turkey's urging, Russia and Iran advised Assad to transfer power peacefully. On December 13, Foreign Minister Fidan stated, "We paved the way for this to be bloodless by continuing focused talks. The Iranian foreign minister came, and we got together with the Russians and Iranians in Doha and talked about certain issues. If the regime had been supported, it could have been very bloody. The Russians and Iranians saw that there was no point in continuing this. After a certain point, they called, and Assad left that evening." Once again, compare Assad's quiet evacuation under Russian protection on December 8 with the chaotic and desperate U.S. withdrawal from Kabul airport on August 16, 2021. The horrifying scenes of Afghans clinging to a U.S. military plane as it taxied remain unforgettable. Yet, Western media continues to proclaim Russia's defeat in Syria loudly. From Russia's perspective, Putin does not seem particularly concerned or fearful about Assad's regime collapse. According to his remarks, Russia's mission in Syria was to eliminate terrorist groups. He stated, "We entered Syria 10 years ago to prevent the creation of a terrorist stronghold there, similar to those we've seen in other countries, for example, Afghanistan. We have largely achieved that goal. Russia's mission in Syria was never secretly intended to prop up Assad's regime." As Putin explained, "We did not deploy any ground forces in Syria. Our presence consisted solely of two bases, air base and naval base." He also confirmed, "Our special operations forces have been withdrawn from Syria and are not engaged in the conflict there." Putin emphasized that Syrian armed forces carried out operations on the ground and specific Iranian proxies, with Russia maintaining a limited and focused presence. President Putin first revealed the incidents in Syria, stating that approximately 30,000 Syrian army soldiers and Iranian forces defending Aleppo surrendered to a rebel group of only 350 fighters and continued to lay down their arms in a series of other cities against a small number of opposition forces. He also disclosed that Russia evacuated 4,000 Iranian troops back to Terra while other proxy forces, referring to Hezbollah, fled to Lebanon and Iraq without engaging in combat with HTS rebels. Through this statement, Putin demonstrated cunning and pragmatism by reminding the public of the cowardice of Iranian proxy forces that abandoned cities without fighting and later fled abroad. Ultimately, Russia avoided Western criticism by choosing not to ally with the Iranian axis. Regarding Russia's future influence in Syria, Putin openly admitted that Russia maintains contact with HTS rebels, and their discussions will impact the fate of the bases in Latakia. He stated, "Most of the groups controlling the situation there told us they would be interested in our military bases." He then proposed that the international community could use these Russian bases to manage humanitarian aid for Syria. Not only Russia but also Western countries are in contact with HTS. The Straits Times reported that some European nations are even courting HTS by promising to lift restrictions on the Islamist group, provided they demand Russia vacate its bases in Syria. Meanwhile, the Washington Post reported that the Biden administration is in contact with HTS to consider removing the group from the list of foreign terrorist organizations. Ironically, the West is disregarding the reality that Syria is transitioning from a semi-secular state under President Assad to a form of extremist Islamic State. According to President Putin, the primary beneficiary of Syria's collapse is Israel, as they have demilitarized Syria and expanded their occupied territories within the country. Putin also took this opportunity to criticize Israel's settlements in Palestine and its military operations in Gaza. These are consistent stances of Russia and nothing new, as they condemn Israel's excessive military actions but never take steps harmful to Israel. However, what is surprising is that President Putin refrained from criticizing Turkey. Instead, he explained that Turkey is doing everything to ensure security along its southern border as the situation in Syria unfolds. This implies that Ankara's goal is to repatriate Syrian refugees and push back US-backed Kurdish militias along its border. So why, on the same issue, does Putin criticize only Israel for exploiting Syria post-Assad but not Turkey? The complex interdependence between Russia and Turkey can explain this. The two are closely connected through cooperation in nuclear energy, the S-400 air defense system, natural gas trade, tourism, and Turkey's previous role in mediating between Russia and Ukraine. In contrast, while Israel does not provide lethal weapons to Ukraine or join the West in sanctioning Russia, there is little trade linkage between Russia and Israel, and no military technical cooperation. Therefore, it is more advantageous to criticize Israel for occupying parts of Syria, to align with regional public opinion, while remaining silent about Turkey doing the same. Additionally, during the Q&A session clarifying the situation in Syria, President Putin mocked the Biden administration's claims that Russia is facing defeat in Syria. Putin's overarching message was that Russia will have much to discuss with Trump when they meet, implying that the Biden administration no longer holds influence over Syria's future. The Biden administration's efforts to rally Arab nations have gained little traction due to a significant lack of trust. Indeed, a new matrix is emerging, with Arab nations believing that the outgoing Biden administration is deliberately creating a quagmire in the Middle East for the incoming Trump administration. Evidence for this lies in the events of December 20th, when President Biden sent Barbara Leaf, Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, to Syria to meet with HTS leader Ahmad al-Shara. Previously, the U.S. had listed him as a terrorist and placed a $10 million bounty on his capture. Yet now, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State was dispatched to deliver the Biden administration's decision to revoke the warrant and even declared that very productive meetings had been held with HTS representatives. It appears Russia has outmaneuvered the Biden administration, as Putin hinted that Russia is working with new leadership in Damascus. He revealed that Russia is contemplating its relationship with the forces controlling Damascus, stating that if Russia remains there, they will act in the host nation's interests, including supporting the positions of the current authorities governing Syria's territory. This also reaffirms Russia's subtle approach to power transition in post-Assad Syria. Pragmatism is becoming the Kremlin's prevailing trend, even in the case of Syria and the Ukraine conflict. On the U.S. side, the question now is, should the incoming Trump administration reduce the U.S. forces or completely withdraw from Syria? It should be noted that Trump has declared that the U.S. should have nothing to do with Syria. However, during the brief remaining tenure of the Democratic Party, the Biden administration opposed Trump's statement. On December 20th, Pentagon spokesperson General Pat Ryder revealed that the number of U.S. troops in Syria had risen to 2,000, more than double the reported figure of 900. These troops are still actively deployed in Syria with no withdrawal plans. This indicates that the deep state seeks to create as much chaos as possible before Trump takes office.